Conspiracies of Michael Jackson being alive. Michael Jackson was the king of pop, the master of the moonwalk, and a man that set the tone for generations. Yeah, he was a man who was not at all there in some ways, and that eventually cost him his life. Or did it? Here's a few reasons why we think Michael Jackson is still alive. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Number 6. The reason for Michael Jackson being alive. Officially, Michael Jackson passed away on June 25th, 2009. That was only 10 years ago now. Because his passing was from taking too much of a prescription medication given to Jackson by his personal physician, among others, which is proof why you don't abuse prescription medication. No one saw this coming since Jackson was already getting ready to perform what might have been his biggest concert tour ever in the form of This Is It, which would ironically become a documentary movie of sorts to chronicleize the last days of Michael Jackson. But when the shock wore off as the details came out about the passing, many fans and conspiracy theorists got more and more skeptical as to whether Jackson was really gone at all. But that begs the obvious question. If he was indeed alive, why put the world through this? Why put his family through this? Especially his kids, who he each truly adored. What could Jackson have been thinking to make him do such a thing? It might have to do with the fact that while he was the legend in the music industry, behind the scenes he was a much different man. And as the recent movie Leaving Neverland showed, that different man hurt a lot of different people behind closed doors. While on stage his life was glorified because of his personality and musical abilities, his home life was something much more scattered. The way he acted, treated others, and allegedly treated certain children, which became Leaving Neverland, how he treated his own children, dangling one off a balcony for starters, and filled up newspapers, especially in the later years of his life. Depending on who you talk to, Michael Jackson was one of the most gifted performers ever, or one of the most distinguished men alive. And who would want to live with this kind of contradiction, stress, and hardship is something that he lived with since his own youth. He knew from a young age that his family, the Jacksons, were very far from perfect. While they were a happy group on stage, off stage they were a mess. Joe Jackson, the father, would constantly mistreat his family. LaToya had a very dark period because of her managers and husband. Jermaine and Randy had troubled personal lives with their wives, and so on and so forth. So this kind of stress is something that builds up over time, and eventually it'll make people do crazy things when not handled properly. And it was clear that Jackson wasn't handling it properly, so given the options in front of him, he might have thought that faking his own demise was the best way to go. Plus, he likely thought that this would help his children. I'll talk more about them later. But he knew that his fame, both on and off stage, were affecting him, and passing away would protect them in some ways, and that honestly did work. Either way you look at it, it's clear that Jackson had plenty of reasons to disappear, and maybe that's exactly what he did. Number 5. His passing doesn't add up. There have been many people throughout history who have claimed to fake their own passing. But the reason some of these theories persist is that there are clues and bits of information that honestly make people think that they're still alive. And Michael Jackson's definitely had that. Let's start at the beginning. How was Michael Jackson discovered to be deceased? Through his personal physician, Conrad Murray. It was Murray's testimony that painted the picture for what happened to Jackson. According to Murray, he went to check on Jackson when he didn't come out of his room at his place in the morning. He was supposed to be rehearsing for his This Is It tour, but despite a great practice the previous morning, Jackson didn't come out of the room. When Murray entered the room, he claimed that Jackson was near lifeless. His body was warm and he had a pulse, but he wasn't moving or responding, and so he went and performed CPR on Jackson. He did this for about 10 minutes before getting help, but by the time the ambulances arrived, Jackson had been in that state for about 30 minutes. The medics tried to bring him back but were unable to. He was gone, or so they told us. Let's start with Murray. It was noted later on that he did CPR incorrectly. Specifically, he did CPR on the bed, which is incredibly non-helpful and helped lead to Jackson's passing. This, along with the use of medical substances that were by Murray, led investigators to think that this was more of a case of involuntary manslaughter versus an accidental overdose, which was the official diagnosis before further investigation was done. How would a licensed physician not know how to do correct CPR? It also took him about 10 minutes to go and get help. Because of the circumstances of which Jackson was living in at the time, there was no landline, and Murray claimed that he couldn't use his cell phone because he didn't know the full address. It sounds rather convenient or even planned. All of this paints a very odd picture, and one that could lead Jackson to faking his own passing. Yet all the time in the world, and Murray could have easily been on it, paid enough, or given the right benefits should he go away to prison. All of this creates a narrative that points to Jackson faking his own final exit. Plus, with Murray taking the fall, no one would suspect Jackson of doing such a thing, because he was killed and this is still only the beginning. Number 4, his funeral. For another big clue as to why Michael Jackson might still be alive, let's look at his funeral and the circumstances surrounding it. During the memorial, Marlon Jackson, who was the 6th child of the Jackson family and brother to Michael, noted, "Maybe not Michael that will leave you alone." That's an odd thing to say at a memorial, and as he's clearly calling out all the critics and haters that Jackson has earned in his later years, but still at the same time, when you're supposed to be honoring your brother, why say that? And why use the phrase, "leave you alone"? That implies you're still able to be left alone. Then there's the fact that his body is in a $25,000 solid bronze casket in the Holy Terrace section of the Great Mausoleum. Why is that important? Because of the placement of the caskets. It's in a spot where no one can get to it without serious clearance. Not even the family can go and see the casket unless a great circumstance is presented. Now on the surface this seems fine. After all, the Jackson family likely wanted to make sure that the body of Jackson wasn't stolen, which has happened before with other celebrities like Charlie Chaplin, or desecrated, or other such things. But another take on it might be that they, or Michael Jackson, didn't want his body to be examined too closely. As any magician would tell you, the greatest trick of a performer is sleight of hand, and Michael Jackson definitely knew this, by his many performances. So why not stage a grand ceremony, one so lavish that they make you think that you're gone, and then you just disappear into the next. Plus, if no one can see the body, they can examine it themselves and determine whether it's real or not. Finally, on this particular topic, if you look at the death certificate of Michael Jackson, you'll see that it reads Michael Joseph Jackson. There's a problem with that. Mainly, Michael's middle name was Joe, not Joseph. It was named after his father, which begs the question of how they messed that up. It would have been in his records that he was Joe and not Joseph. So, was the coroner doing that on accident, or was it intentional? Because falsifying a death certificate wasn't a big deal. A lot of mysteries are born from their funeral, don't you think? Number 3, sales. When a musician passes away, fans and supporters feel that they need to honor the late singer or singers so that their memory can live on. Typically, they do this by buying music that the artists have made in bulk, and when Michael Jackson passed on, the sales of his singles, records, albums, CDs, and even the Jackson 5 versions, all of that boomed in sales. Like seriously, he was massive in the course of mere hours. The sales of everything Michael Jackson had skyrocketed to the extent that stores and websites were running out of product. They were literally getting sold out of tracks and albums. Even Amazon had issues staying in stock for weeks, and it wasn't just in the United States either. It was in many parts of the world. Even Japan was selling out of Michael Jackson items. His items were selling so well that they topped the charts years and even decades after they phased down, showing the support that the King of Pop had from its supporters. And don't get me started on the Michael Jackson memorabilia on places like eBay. So what does this prove? Well, the money has to go somewhere, and if you plan it right, he could have easily diverted a lot of his exits to separate accounts that he could access, or someone having access on his behalf, like he knew that his passing would cause such a rise in stocks, so to speak. So he simply capitalized on it. Why would he do that though? Lots of reasons. Some I've mentioned before. But the biggest one might be, despite his fame and wealth, he actually did have some money issues. And this would not only fix that, but set himself up for the life that he was about to have. Not to mention, if someone had paid close attention to his main account, they might notice Michael Jackson dipping into it. But if he had his own deal on the side, not so much, because they wouldn't know where to look. Number 2, people claim to have seen him in multiple places. What's a conspiracy theory about a celebrity who passed away without people claiming that they saw him alive? It's a classic, and yes, people have claimed to have seen Michael Jackson alive in multiple places, no less. Some of them, to be fair, are just inferences and speculation, such as when Paris Jackson, his daughter, made a post about clothes and everyone thought that the clothes were a symbol that Jackson was still alive. You know, that kind of thing. But when Paris posted the video, and in the background you could see someone that definitely resembled Michael Jackson, especially in the face, that's something that got a lot of people's attention. Then in 2017, one of Michael Jackson's nephews got married, and the video of the event showed a very bulky man covered in clothing walking around, especially near the prince and Paris. Upon further examination, it was believed that this was Michael using a pseudo-source that he had during a short role in the film Ghost, which he would have had access to and totally would have used to hide his identity. Then in 2017, Janet Jackson released a song called The Great Forever. A man was listening to it, and when he caught the sound of a person singing that he didn't recognize, it clearly wasn't Janet Jackson. So he got the song and put it into a video editor, and when he did, he lowered the volume on it, and the other parts to discover that it was someone who sounded an awful lot like Michael Jackson. The line that he was saying was very convenient. Not too pleased with what you're digging, I'm just busy living my life. Janet and Michael did have a special relationship. It's not much of a stretch that he could go to her and have her keep it a secret. But remember, the guy had to break down the song before finding the voice, so the average listener wouldn't have been able to pick up on it. So whether you believe these sightings or not, it's really up to you. But it's something to consider, and these might not be the last sightings that we have of Michael Jackson. Number 1, Elvis helped him out. No, I'm serious here. One of the most ironic things in the music industry was that the king of rock, Elvis Presley, had a daughter who would later go on to marry Michael Jackson. It was a match made in heaven until it wasn't, but that doesn't mean that Elvis and Michael weren't close. Elvis also passed under mysterious circumstances and had an equally similar odd demise, leaving many to believe that he was in fact alive the whole time, including clues being dropped at his funeral. Sounds similar, and so he felt that he could get away with it. Some speculate that he went to his son-in-law and saw his own struggles and offered him the same way out that he took. Elvis was nice like that, truly, and if Elvis could get away with it, why not Michael? All it would take is planning, timing, and the nerve to do it, and Michael did have that. And so there you have it, some proof that Michael Jackson might still be alive. Which of these points do you think were the most compelling? Also, which do you feel need more evidence? Let me know in the comments down below. Be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time on the channel.